Welcome to Just Stories. We hope you enjoy the story. Eternal Flames, Syria's Unending Civil War. Chapter 1, Seeds of Conflict, Understanding Syria's Historical and Political Context. Syria, a land with a rich history and diverse cultural tapestry, has experienced a tumultuous journey that laid the groundwork for the tragic civil war that unfolded. To truly comprehend the roots of the conflict, it is crucial to delve into the historical and political factors that shaped Syria's past. Our journey begins with Syria's formation as a modern state following the collapse of the Ottoman Empire after World War I. Under French mandate, Syria witnessed a struggle for independence, culminating in its establishment as an independent republic in 1946. However, this newfound independence was accompanied by persistent challenges. Syria's political landscape was marked by military coups, shifting alliances, and periodic authoritarian rule. In 1970, Hafez al-Assad seized power through a bloodless coup, ushering in an era of Ba'athist rule that lasted for decades. Assad's iron grip on power ensured stability but also stifled political freedoms, leading to simmering discontent within the population. As the years passed, socioeconomic disparities grew, exacerbating grievances among marginalized communities. The rural population faced economic hardships, while urban centers experienced stark income inequality. Such inequalities, coupled with government corruption and limited job opportunities, fueled frustrations that would eventually erupt. Furthermore, sectarian tensions have long simmered beneath the surface of Syrian society. Syria is composed of diverse ethnic and religious groups, with Sunni Arabs constituting the majority, followed by Alawites, Kurds, Christians, and other minority communities. These divisions, historically managed by authoritarian rule, emerged as significant fault lines when the civil war erupted. Syria's geopolitical position also contributed to its vulnerability. The country has been entangled in regional power struggles, often becoming a battleground for competing interests. Its proximity to Israel, Lebanon, Iraq, and Turkey made it susceptible to regional tensions and external influences. The impact of the Arab Spring, a wave of popular uprisings demanding political and economic reforms across the Middle East, reverberated within Syria's borders. In 2011, inspired by the successful uprisings in Tunisia and Egypt, Syrians took to the streets demanding democratic reforms, freedom of expression, and an end to corruption. Regrettably, instead of responding to these legitimate demands, the Syrian government responded with brutal force. Peaceful protests transformed into an armed conflict as opposition groups emerged, aiming to topple the regime. The seeds of conflict had been sown, and the Syrian civil war had begun. Understanding Syria's historical and political context provides a foundation for comprehending the complexities of the ongoing civil war. It enables us to grasp the grievances, divisions, and external influences that have contributed to the protracted nature of the conflict. In the following chapters, we will explore the outbreak of the Syrian uprising, the fragmented rebel landscape, international interventions, and the devastating humanitarian crisis. By examining these crucial aspects, we hope to shed light on the multifaceted dimensions of the unending flames that have engulfed Syria. Chapter 2, The Spark Ignites, the Outbreak of the Syrian Uprising. Welcome to the chapter that unravels the pivotal moment when the Syrian uprising erupted, forever altering the course of the nation's history. In this chapter, we will embark on a journey through the events that transformed peaceful protests into a full-fledged armed conflict, igniting the flames of the Syrian civil war. Our story begins in the southern city of Dara, where a group of schoolchildren unknowingly lit the fuse that would set off a chain reaction of defiance and dissent. In March 2011, these children were arrested and subjected to brutal torture for painting anti-government graffiti on a wall. Their mistreatment sparked outrage and sparked demonstrations demanding justice and an end to the regime's repressive tactics. As news of the arrest spread, so did the anger and frustration among the Syrian people. The initial protest in Dara quickly grew into a nationwide movement as Syrians from all walks of life joined hands in solidarity, inspired by the wave of pro-democracy uprisings sweeping across the Middle East during the Arab Spring. The demands of the protesters were clear: an end to decades of authoritarian rule, respect for human rights, freedom of speech, and economic reforms. Peaceful marches and sit-ins became a common sight in major cities like Damascus, Aleppo, Homs, and Hama. People from different backgrounds, regardless of their ethnicity or religious beliefs, stood shoulder to shoulder, united in their pursuit of a better future. However, the Syrian government, led by President Bashar al-Assad, responded with a heavy hand, deploying security forces to quell the dissent. Peaceful demonstrations were met with violence, as live ammunition and tear gas were used to disperse crowds. Instead of heeding the cries of their own people, the regime chose to suppress the uprising through brutal means, further fueling the people's determination to continue their struggle. The escalation of violence led to a dangerous cycle of protests and government crackdowns. The government's response only served to galvanize the opposition further, as many defected from the military and formed armed rebel groups to protect their communities and fight back against the regime's forces. The transformation from a peaceful uprising to an armed conflict was not immediate or uniform across the country. It was a gradual process, shaped by the escalating violence and the regime's unwillingness to engage in meaningful dialogue. As the months turned into years, the conflict became increasingly complex, with various factions emerging and vying for influence. The outbreak of the Syrian uprising was a turning point, both for the country and the wider region. The once unified demand for political reforms fractured as different groups pursued their own agendas. The regime's brutal response, rather than quelling the dissent, laid the foundation for a protracted and devastating civil war. In the chapters that follow, we will explore the fragmented rebel landscape, international interventions, and the harrowing humanitarian crisis that unfolded. By examining these critical aspects, we aim to provide a comprehensive understanding of the unending flames that have engulfed Syria, offering insights into the complexities of the conflict and the profound impact it has had on the Syrian people. Chapter 3: Fragmented Factions, Unraveling the Complex Rebel Landscape. Welcome to a chapter that delves into the intricate web of rebel factions that emerged amidst the Syrian civil war. In this chapter, we will explore the diverse ideologies, competing interests, and internal dynamics that shaped the rebel landscape, adding further complexity to an already convoluted conflict. As the Syrian uprising transformed into an armed conflict, opposition groups began to emerge, each with its own vision for a post-Assad Syria. The umbrella term rebel factions encompasses a broad range of groups, spanning the ideological spectrum from moderate to Islamist and jihadist factions. At the outset of the conflict, the Free Syrian Army emerged as one of the primary opposition groups, composed of defected soldiers and civilians who took up arms against the regime. The FSA aimed to defend local communities and challenge the Assad regime's military dominance. However, as the war progressed, the FSA struggled to maintain a unified command structure, leading to fragmentation and the rise of other rebel factions. Other prominent factions that gained influence included Islamist groups such as Ahrar al-Sham and Jaish al-Islam. These factions sought to establish an Islamic state in Syria, differing from the FSA's more secular aspirations. They gained support from some segments of the population due to their effectiveness in combat and the provision of social services in areas under their control. Alongside the Islamist factions, extremist jihadist groups like Jabhat al-Nusra and the notorious Islamic State of Iraq and Syria also emerged. These groups exploited the chaos and power vacuum to establish their own self-proclaimed caliphate and impose their radical interpretation of Islam, perpetrating acts of violence and terror that further deepened the complexity of the conflict. Internal conflicts and power struggles among rebel factions further fragmented the opposition. Competing interests, territorial disputes, and ideological differences often led to infighting, weakening the overall opposition and allowing the Assad regime to exploit these divisions to its advantage. Regional and international actors also played a significant role in shaping the rebel landscape. Various countries, including Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United States, provided support to different rebel factions, often with their own geopolitical interests in mind. The influx of weapons and external funding further exacerbated the fragmentation as different groups became beholden to their respective backers. Understanding the complex rebel landscape is crucial to comprehending the dynamics of the Syrian civil war. The presence of diverse factions with varying objectives and ideologies not only complicated the conflict but also posed challenges for the Syrian population seeking stability and a peaceful resolution. In the chapters that follow, we will delve into the impact of international interventions, the human cost of the conflict, and the ongoing humanitarian crisis. By examining these crucial aspects, we aim to provide a comprehensive understanding of the unending flames that have engulfed Syria and shed light on the complexities faced by the Syrian people and the wider international community. Chapter 4: International Interventions, the Proxy War Unleashed. Welcome to a chapter that explores the intricate web of international interventions that transformed the Syrian civil war into a complex proxy war. In this chapter, we will delve into the involvement of regional and global powers, their geopolitical interests, and the consequences of their actions on the Syrian conflict. The Syrian civil war became a fertile ground for regional and international powers to pursue their own interests, exacerbating the complexity and intensity of the conflict. Various countries saw the war as an opportunity to advance their agendas and influence the outcome, resulting in a tangled web of competing interests and alliances. One of the key players in the conflict was Iran, which provided significant support to the Assad regime. Iran, a predominantly Shia Muslim country, viewed Syria as a crucial ally in its regional aspirations, as well as a vital link to Lebanon's Hezbollah, a Shia militant group. Iran's backing included military assistance, financial aid, and the deployment of Iranian-backed militias to bolster the regime's forces. On the other hand, several Gulf Arab states, such as Saudi Arabia and Qatar, played a pivotal role in supporting the opposition groups. These countries, predominantly Sunni, saw an opportunity to counter Iranian influence in the region and support Sunni rebel factions in their fight against the Assad regime. They provided financial aid, weapons, and diplomatic support to various opposition groups, albeit often with differing agendas and priorities. Turkey, another significant regional player, also became deeply entangled in the Syrian conflict. Initially supportive of the opposition, Turkey hosted and armed rebel factions, aiming to topple the Assad regime and create a more favorable environment along its southern border. However, as the conflict evolved, Turkey's focus shifted towards countering the Kurdish groups, who had carved out autonomous regions in northern Syria. This led to a complex dynamic where Turkey supported certain rebel factions while targeting Kurdish forces. Global powers also had a stake in the Syrian conflict. The United States, for instance, initially supported moderate opposition groups and provided limited military aid. However, the U.S. approach evolved over time, focusing more on counterterrorism efforts and combating the rise of extremist groups like ISIS. This shift in priorities further complicated the already fragmented rebel landscape. Russia's intervention in 2015 marked a significant turning point in the conflict. Backing the Assad regime, Russia provided military support, including airstrikes, which bolstered the government's position and turned the tide in its favor. Russia's involvement was driven by its long-standing strategic interests in the region, its desire to maintain a presence in the Mediterranean, and its aim to counter what it perceived as Western influence in Syria. The confluence of these international interventions transformed the Syrian conflict into a complex proxy war, with competing powers backing different factions on the ground. This not only prolonged the war but also resulted in a catastrophic humanitarian crisis, with civilian populations caught in the crossfire and facing unimaginable suffering. In the following chapters, we will delve into the human cost of the conflict, the plight of refugees, and the ongoing challenges of the humanitarian crisis. By examining these critical aspects, we aim to shed light on the devastating impact of international interventions and the ramifications they have had on the Syrian people. Chapter 5: The Human Cost, Refugees, Destruction, and Humanitarian Crisis. Welcome to a chapter that delves into the profound human cost inflicted by the Syrian civil war. In this chapter, we will explore the devastating impact on civilians, the mass displacement of refugees, the destruction of infrastructure, and the ongoing humanitarian crisis that continues to unfold. The Syrian civil war has taken an immense toll on the civilian population, resulting in untold suffering and loss. From the early days of the conflict, civilians have been caught in the crossfire, facing indiscriminate violence and grave human rights abuses from all sides. The Assad regime's brutal crackdown, indiscriminate bombings, and the actions of extremist groups have all contributed to the staggering human cost of the war. Perhaps one of the most visible consequences of the conflict has been the massive displacement of Syrians, both internally and externally. Millions of Syrians have been forced to flee their homes, seeking safety within the borders of their own country or crossing international boundaries in search of refuge. The scale of displacement is unprecedented, with families uprooted, torn apart, and forced to endure the hardships of life as refugees. The neighboring countries of Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, and Egypt have borne the brunt of the refugee crisis, hosting millions of Syrians who have sought shelter and a chance to rebuild their shattered lives. This influx has put immense strain on host communities, infrastructure, and resources, creating socio-economic challenges for both refugees and their host countries. The destruction caused by the war is staggering. Homes, hospitals, schools, and vital infrastructure have been reduced to rubble, leaving entire cities and towns in ruins. Cultural heritage sites, some dating back millennia, have been irreparably damaged or destroyed, erasing a significant part of Syria's rich history and cultural legacy. The humanitarian crisis resulting from the conflict has been an ongoing challenge. Basic necessities such as food, water, and healthcare have become scarce commodities for many Syrians. Access to medical care has been severely limited due to the destruction of healthcare facilities and the targeting of medical personnel. Children and vulnerable populations have borne the brunt of the crisis, with widespread malnutrition, lack of education, and psychological trauma affecting their well-being. International and local humanitarian organizations have played a crucial role in providing aid and support to those affected by the conflict. Humanitarian workers have risked their lives to deliver life-saving assistance, often operating in extremely challenging conditions. Their dedication and resilience have made a significant difference in alleviating the suffering of the Syrian people. However, the enormity of the crisis requires sustained international attention and support. The international community must come together to address the immediate needs of the affected population, support the countries hosting refugees, and work towards a lasting political solution that brings an end to the conflict and enables the safe and voluntary return of refugees and internally displaced persons. Thank you for watching our story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you don't miss out on our next video.